you ever been hungry? The Bible seems to imply to us that physiological hunger is also a manifestation of something beyond the physical world, but an indication of our spiritual condition. But the problem of hunger extends far beyond the spiritual or the physical sensation of an empty stomach. While hunger primarily manifests as a physiological need for food, our body craving and asking for nourishment, its impact on emotional well-being can be profound and multi-faced. Do you know how I know this? The hunger impacts us emotionally too? Because I myself have been hungry before. I remember in 2000 being unable to obtain food while I was still new in the United States of America and didn't know of all the resources that is at people's disposal here in America. I remember having to fill my belly with water that had chicken bouillons for flavor. This was not the only time in my life that I was hungry. After being married and having our first son and being the provider of my family, we found ourselves with no food and no money. I remember looking at my wife and son and feeling hopeless, useless by not being able to provide for my family what I promised them I would. Hunger can lead an individual and families to some very difficult emotional places. So it is true. The uncertainty of not knowing where the next meal will come from can create significant anxiety and stress in the life of an individual. Individuals experiencing hunger may constantly worry about how they will feed themselves and their families, leading to chronic stress and mental health issues. Unthinkable actions are taken in moments like that. It's also true that parents who struggle to provide enough food for their children may experience overwhelming feelings of guilt and self-shame. They may perceive themselves as failing in their role as caregivers, despite their best effort to provide for their families. As of late, I have seen how hunger affects the well-being of families while visiting South Africa. Mom and dads fighting for survival, working on the dumps to be able to get enough money or resources to be able to put food at the table to feed their families. People who make the most unimaginable things in order to provide for their families. The issue at hand is not really a matter of where, but how in the world could one afford to feed those who are under their fold. And this is the same issue we find in John chapter 6, where we find Jesus doing his fifth sign, a miracle or action of wonder. Jesus is sitting, watching the great multitude as they draw near and begin to settle around him. Jesus looks at Philip, one of his disciples, and asks the question, "Where are we to buy bread so that these people may eat?" Philip was from Bethesda, the place where this event is happening, and would have some kind of knowledge of the local places that is there for food. So Philip looks at Jesus and says, "Jesus, this is not a matter of where to buy food, but how in the world, how are we going to afford this? Do you know how much this will cost? We can't afford to feed so many people." When perspectives are low and expectations are high, people are often led to hopeless places. So, in Philip's perspective, he was right. It was costly. 200 denarii, which was almost a year's wage, would not be enough, would not put a dent into the bill. The situation is hopeless. People had great expectations, and the disciples didn't have a positive outlook on the situation. Jesus is never without a plan. One of the things I love about Jesus is the fact that he's never without a plan. All this conversation was part of his plan. He was testing Philip because Jesus already knew what he was going to do. He already had he had already something in mind and was just checking in to see people's perspective and expectations. While the crowds and the majority of the disciples had this great expectation for Jesus, they were following him because they knew what he was capable of delivering, not so much for who he really was. Jesus' inner circle, they are not so confident as the people were in Jesus' ability to do what they expected him to do. They don't seem to have such high expectations, or if they do, they don't seem very confident that Jesus can meet their expected need. Only Philip and Andrew raises concern, and Andrew's recommendation is a boy who has 5 loaves and 2 small fish is around here. I can't help but wonder, was the fish a crappie, or were these fish like the crappies that we get on the pond around here, or these were big catfish? I don't know if they were small or they were big, but here's the fact that they were there. And the fact that this boy had these items means that he was most likely a vendor and not a volunteer to the meal prep. Now, it is not only the people and the disciples who have expectations. The boy now too have expectation. He needs paid for the items that he is providing, that they will use. And given the great need and the market law of supply and demand, I'm pretty sure the boy was thinking, oh man, they're going to be paying big money for these items. Jesus does what he always does, right? He surprises people. He knows that they are not seeking him as an end in himself, but as a means to an end, filling their bellies with free food served fast. Jesus exceeds everyone's expectations, but if they would take the time to consider who he really was and what he ultimately would do, they would have understood that he was much more than a miracle worker, that he was the manna from heaven. Where areas the manna fell from heaven in abundance at the times of Moses, here the bread and loaves are multiplied and distributed in abundance from the hands of Jesus himself. Jesus then took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to those who were seated. So also the fish, as much as they wanted. Just as God tested Israel in the wilderness, Jesus tests the disciples and the people to see if they will depend on him and on his words for their provision. Dawn expectations are met, perspectives are challenged, and everyone eats their fill on a green hillside of Galilee. Then Jesus, being very much a rabbi, orders that the leftovers to be collected. In Judaism, the leftovers were referred to as the pia and were always gathered after the meal and given to slaves. Here lies the actual miracle, right? This is the miracle behind the miracle. This is where the real miracle occurs. The key word in understanding this miracle is in the Greek word translated basket in the English. The miracle is not that Jesus multiplied the loaves and the fish, but that there were exactly 12 small individual-sized baskets that are collected with leftover, indicating the point to be Jesus is capable of perfect provision for his disciples who are now serving as slaves of his kingdom. The miracle seemed to be subdued, but the people got the message. Their conclusion was, Jesus is the prophet. A Moses-like character. Jesus provided bread for them as Moses provided manna in the wilderness. Their conviction was so profound that they were going to crown Jesus king. But to save their lives from the Roman punishment and to preserve his life for the time being, Jesus slips away into the hills alone as the perfect provider for his people. What an amazing God. Like people in Jesus' day, we don't realize what life in Jesus is all about. The freedom from ourselves and the freedom for God and others as we live abundantly by faith in Him and His Word, rather than out of fear and scarcity. When we realize that Jesus and His Word, and not the bread or the jeans or the shoes or a race or a career move, is our daily sustenance, we will understand what I personally understood through the food scarcity in my life. That a disciple of Jesus can rest in the fact that Jesus is the perfect provider with perfect timing to satisfy not only your physical needs, but also, most importantly, your spiritual needs.